Hello and welcome to Race Streamer. In this video I've gone back to footage that I shot last year in November, which was at an event called MSD Live, hosted by MotorsportDays, that took place at Silverstone. And it has to be said about this event that it's truly amazing. I had such a good day at this last year, and it's really sad that it wasn't able to run this year due to COVID restrictions and all that jazz, but you can understand why. So what happened last year when I went to this event, it was a chance for me to test a bunch of different race cars. As you can see, I'm sitting in this Honda Civic Type R from the BRSCC Civic Cup at the moment and testing it out on circuit. And all you had to do to have this privilege was pay a small fee to the corresponding team or championship that you wanted to test the car from, and then off you went as long as you had a road license, which is madness when you think about it. And it was genuinely such an affordable way of dipping your toes into driving some race cars. That was the main purpose of the event for me anyway. You can also go there to network with other people involved in motorsport. There were a fair few famous faces there which I spoke to, and you can also buy parts at trade prices like you can at the Autosport International show. Did I mention that this is a free to attend event as well? So honestly, I'm not affiliated with the business at all in this, but such a class event, and really looking forward to it coming back next year at Donington in summer and then Silverstone on their normal annual basis in November. Now, as you can see, there's a massive range of cars that pop up in the garages at MSD Live. You can't test all of them, not all of them are going out on circuit, but most of them are as it goes. If you just have a road license, you can test drive various sort of lower level club racing cars like those 206s you just saw and this low cost. If you want to test drive some of the higher tier cars like your GT4 machinery and that F1000 going past, then you need to have at least a race license, but you should communicate with the championship or team involved and you can find out what requirements they want from someone who's going to drive their cars. To give a rough idea of the fees that some were asking for, I paid £150 for a 15-minute session at most on these 2 days, and the least I paid was 20 quid, which is completely bizarre in my head. It's but that's up to each team and championships to set their own pricing. And you can also go and have some passenger rides in these drift cars, which I couldn't leave out this video because they're just so good to watch. I didn't do this myself, but it was good enough watching this from the side of the pit wall. So now with some onboard footage from some of the test drives that I had, starting off in a Peugeot 206 GTI Cup, which is part of Track Attack Race Club. Now, the reason that this interested me is because of the headline that they go about marketing their championship with, which is roughly that you can go racing for a full season on a budget of £4,000. Now, I think that's the budget for running the car and your race fees and everything associated with your 1 year costs rather than the cost of the car itself. But even so, that's definitely the most accessible way into motorsport that I've found still to this day. And you notice the fact that it's cheap to get in from when you drive these cars. I'll be completely honest and say that I can see the appeal of being able to get in a race car on a circuit and competing for as little money as possible, don't get me wrong. This seems like the way in for that. But personally, this doesn't feel like a race car. This feels like a car that has had the modifications done, like a roll cage and having fire extinguishers and a few other bits and bobs necessary to make it legal to go racing in. So you can see that there's a different steering wheel on there. There's a tube off to the left-hand side of picture, which is supplying some fresh air into the car because the aircon system's been taken out. But there's not much else that's been done to this car. So with this being standard pedals and gear shift in the 206, it was impossible to heel and toe in this thing. So if that's something that you want to get out of a race car, this is not the car for you. And because that's something that I'm used to in my road car being a GT86, then I have to admit that immediately switched me off from thinking about seriously taking this thing racing. It was still good to test drive the car, don't get me wrong, and I'm really thankful to John, who's the guy who was independently running this car, for allowing me to go and test it, by all means. So some of the things that I noticed about this car on this circuit on this day in these greasy conditions was that it had horrendous amounts of understeer. I'm assuming that the tyres it was on were pretty baked, so I can understand why they would want to leave tyres on that have gone through the whole season and are pretty much on the way out, so that way they don't dig into fresh rubber for this event. But it has to be said that the amount of understeer was just like, you can hear the tyres squeal even though it's greasy and I'm really not going that quickly. It was just it was absolutely horrendous, if I'm being honest. So it was still good fun, don't get me wrong. The power's not magnificent. The handling, it's not really that positive. The brakes feel pretty squishy. So I wouldn't say that this is a fantastic driver's car by any stretch, but like I said, the whole point of this being that you can get in the car and go racing for as little money as possible. Compared with the Honda Civic that I test drove earlier that day, which was a BRSCC Civic Cup, which you saw earlier in the video, that was a properly sorted race car. I mean, yes, it's still converted from a road car, but it had a decent number of modifications to it. It had a bag more power as well, being a Civic Type R. So that felt like a proper race car, to be completely honest with you. It was a really nice neutral balance, running on more than stock suspension. So that was genuinely so much fun to drive, and it's a shame that I wasn't able to capture any onboard footage from it. But there was such a stark difference between that BRSCC Civic Cup and this Peugeot, it has to be said. Now, this is a test that took place the following morning, which is in a Mazda MX-5 Mark 1 that was built to run in the BRSCC Championship, but is also, as far as I'm aware, eligible to run probably in 5 Club, which is the 750 Motor Club Championship. Near enough the same setup for both. I think it's just different control parts. Don't quote me on that. It's worth looking at the championships if you're genuinely that interested in it. But as you can see, the conditions are absolutely biblical here. So what I didn't expect, firstly, I was let out in the car on my own for this, which was an amazing experience in itself, but I didn't expect to go aquaplaning down Hanger Straight. So this was genuinely a Code Brown moment for about half of this session, and that's down to the fact that, again, this car was on tyres that had done, I'm guessing, a good amount of the season and were definitely on their last leg. So I didn't think to check them before this session, but they definitely did not have a lot of tread on them, and that was evident from how much the car was just not finding grip in a straight line. However, it was still an absolutely amazing experience, albeit a slightly terrifying one, because I'd never driven on a circuit this wet and in a car on such the wrong tyres, basically. So it was just good to get the driving time and get used to these conditions in that way. In a rear-wheel drive car as well, which is what I've been more used to driving my GT86 on track days and sprint days previously. Now, I'm not going to say who the team was for this one, because there's some good points about this car, but there's equally some bad points, and I'm not a namer and shamer publicly with videos like this, but what I will say is that this wasn't my first test drive in this car. I'd actually gone to drive it the previous morning with the guy that owns the car in the car with me, and there'd been an issue with when he got in the passenger footwell. Unfortunately, when we turned the ignition on, he had his foot on a wire in the passenger footwell, which was the wire for the wipers, and he burnt through that, and we had no wipers. And we went out in roughly similar conditions to this, and it was just impossible. I was giving it a fair go, but I was going down Hanger Straight and I was absolutely blind. I couldn't even see brake lights or rain lights on cars ahead, so it was genuinely just too dangerous. So we came in from that session. I said honestly how unhappy I was about it and how I just felt like it was a really stupid idea that we'd gone out at all. And off the back of that, they offered me another session for no extra charge the following morning, for which the wipers were fixed, and because he'd been out in the car previously with me the day before, he'd seen my driving and was willing to trust me and that I was going to be safe on circuit, which I have to admit I'm quite surprised with anyway, because we had by no means pushed on that Friday session, because I'd been taking it really easy as I could see approximately nothing. But what resulted was me going out for this session on my own and having all the freedom to do what I wanted to. Well, I mean, within the restrictions of the track day regulations that they were running on circuit, which included things like only overtaking on the left and by consent only, like you saw me pointing a guy through in a MX-5 Mark 4 there, which I guess was running on well, either well-treaded tyres or racing wets, because it had so much more pace. But yeah, just still a really good experience. I'm very thankful to the guy that owned this car for having the trust in me to let me out on my own, and for being considerate and giving me another session. But this particular car I would never ever go racing in, and that's purely from the point of view that there was no wiper switch in the car, which is really, I mean, you can tell how stupid that sounds, but that was actually the case. There was no salt to activate the wiper, so it was either permanently on or permanently off, and the only way of changing that is opening up the bonnet and adjusting a switch in there. And that's not because there was any issue with the car, that was by design, which is so insanely daft. So I was just glad that the wiper works and I could test drive it here, because it gave me a chance to feel how it drove driving an example of a Mazda MX-5 Mark 1. And it's something that made me realise that I really wanted to drive a rear-wheel drive race car if I ever went racing, which I have now, which is awesome. I've been racing with Sam McKee and his BMW. And yeah, it's just something that made me realise that, but it definitely was a case of I was never, ever going to race this car for sure. It's just not safe. Still has to be said, I'm still extremely grateful to both the championship and the guy that runs this particular team for giving me the opportunity to go out in this car, because at the end of the day, yeah, it was far from ideal, but they're still giving me the chance to go out in a car for really not a lot of cash, and that is, you got to be thankful for that. It's such an amazing opportunity that they give you on this event, and it's down to the teams in the championships to allow that as well. And it also needs to be said that I'm pretty sure in saying that not every MX-5 Mark 1 is going to not have a wiper switch inside the cabin. So it's probably just this car as it goes. I'm sure there's plenty of other safe race cars that you can drive out in the BRSCC MX-5 Championship that are also eligible for 5 Club run by 750 Most Club. Now, the final test that I had was later on that morning on the Saturday, on the second day, which was in a Hyundai Coupe Cup, which was run by Easy Racing. That's EEZY Racing. It's run by a guy called Trevor, who's from South Africa, and he had a few of his friends who were part of the race team along with him that day. I have to say, I had a really good impression from those guys. They're definitely racing enthusiasts, but they're not running the biggest operation just on this single car. But that's reflected in what they ask for to come racing with them in this particular championship, which is run by the BARC. And although I kind of went into this test knowing that I just made up my mind on I was really looking to race a rear-wheel drive car, this car was so much fun. Genuinely very well balanced. I don't know if that's just the chassis or what they'd done to it, but I had such a blast in this car. The pedals were such that you could heel and toe in this one like you could in the Mazda, unlike you could in the Peugeot. It's worth saying that you could heel and toe in the Civic as well. So all of those cars felt like they had the basic ingredients for what needed to be a race car as it goes. I don't think this Hyundai is particularly modified as it goes, but it's got the modifications it needs for the championship, and it felt properly fun. It was very adjustable in the corners, so you can see me sliding on the way into some of these corners just from trail braking. So it had a bit of an oversteer setup on it, and I was able to plant the power straight mid-corner, and it wasn't oversteering horrendously on the exit. It's not got bags of power, this car, so considering how low you are in this car and the lack of power it has, I don't know, it felt kind of slow, to be completely honest. Not saying the car is like road car slow, but race car, it wasn't that quick. Like the Peugeot 206 probably had about the same amount of power down the straights as this car did. So again, it's very much an entry-level club championship running around in Hyundai Coupe Cup. But if I were ever going to do some front-wheel drive racing on a tight budget, this would definitely be the championship that I go with. So massive props to Trevor and his team for letting me out in their car, again for really not a lot of money. The final awesome thing that needs to be said about this team and this car is I went to this event with a guy called Barney, who actually went on to race this car this year. So I'll put a link in the video and in the description below to the footage that you can watch of him having his first ever race, which was in this car at Mallory Park, which happened earlier this year. It's a good watch. So final things to be said about this event is it's 100% the best place to be if you are considering getting into racing and you just want to dip your toes in by being able to test drive a few race cars without breaking the bank. I mean, each test that I had costs less than your standard commercial driving experience, so from that point of view it's an absolute no-brainer. And MSD will be putting on more events like this in 2021, so they've got one scheduled as a one-day event at Donington Park on the National Circuit, which is scheduled for the 13th of July, and hopefully this event that you've been watching will run again in November 2021 on Friday the 19th and Saturday the 20th of November. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe, because I'm going to be uploading more content along these lines, where I had some other experiences driving race cars last year as well, which included the final stages of the Want to Race Ginetta competition and also the Team Hard Scholarship that happened in January 2020. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you again soon.